And I've got a short story about Warwick Castle, which is interesting, certainly to me. Hopefully it's interesting to you. So Warwick Castle was the home of Lord Brookes, the Earl of Warwick, who was the richest man in England up till probably 100 years ago. And this medieval castle was ancient, going back to the Roman times in essence. And the Earls of Warwick were French English, in that they were some of the English nobility which had arisen after the French invasion of England in 1066, and they had French names and French surnames and spoke French even though they were in England. And they were, by the Middle Ages, they were English officers when the English turned the tables and dominated France. So in Warwick, in the church in Warwick, near Warwick Castle, there are tombs with English French soldiers who were officers controlling France. So Bordeaux, for example, Aquitaine, all of the west of France was English, and of course Calais in the north was as well. So back to the story. Warwick Castle. This family, like many other landed gentry families in the middle of the 20th century, had to sell their stuff, their land, their estates, to pay death duties. And many of them had been told to sell their assets before they died so that they would be able to pay the government and keep some of the land. Otherwise, it's hard to raise the money after the death. So there was a scramble in the middle of the 20th century for rich aristocrats to sell land, property, estates, antiques. And this Earl of Warwick was like all the others, was selling his estates as fast as he could. And apart from the death duties, he didn't want to live in England and went to live in Italy. And the castle was a burden. It was cold and not knackered, falling to bits, and a long way from London, a long way from any social activity. And the Earl wound down the estates, and in the end wound down the castle. So when he was winding down the castle, there were some core antiques he kept. For example, there was one of the sunflowers. There's a number of sunflowers by Van Gogh. There was one in Warwick Castle. There were some canalettos. He had a pair. He kept canalettos, and these were sold fairly recently, in the last 10 or 15 years, by his son or grandson, I can't remember which one, Lord Brookes, to Madame, I think Madame Tussauds bought them, who ended up owning the castle. And so in this process of selling, dispersing the antiques, other than the ones he kept in the family, the special ones, he had the auction houses from London go up and pick out what they could sell and take away. And then there was this sort of tertiary stock, the rubbish, which he had to sell locally. Now, my father was a dealer in Warwick, and his antique shop was the closest antique shop to the gates of the castle. So Lord Brookes walked into my father's shop in the late 60s, early 70s, and said, "Michael, please come and buy some of the rubbish we have in the house." My father said, "When do you want me to come?" And the Earl of Warwick said, "Come on Monday morning." So my father went on Monday morning at 8:30 or 9 o'clock to the castle and rang the doorbell, which was a pole, a rod going through the top of the exterior gatehouse, and the Earl came, opened the door in his dressing gown, went up the drive to the castle. The drawbridge was down, the portcullis was up, and they went into the castle. And the areas of interest were the attics and the undercroft, the basement, the cellars, where the junk was. And there was just three elements which were interesting. The castle had been electrified in the Victorian era, and from memory I think it was 1870, 1880, and there was a river at the bottom of the castle, and they put a suction turbine into one of the old mill buildings, and the castle was electrified. And when the castle was electrified, all of the gas lights were stripped out and chucked into a cellar, and one of the rooms was full of gas fittings and globes and glass shades and reservoirs and burners and bits and pieces. and my father bought all of those. Another room was full of, these are rooms and cellars in the undercroft. And the undercroft was a cellar basement of 2,000 to 3,000 square feet. In another of the small chambers in the cellar was all of the servants' bells, which had been taken out when the castle was electrified. So most of the rooms for the family had handles by the fireplace. Otherwise there would be ring pulls with a chain covered in velvet going to the ceiling, and these pulls would pull wires in little tubes which would go all over the castle, down to the cellar, to the kitchens, to the laundry area. And because the Earl had the castle electrified, all of the servants' bells were removed and chucked again in a pile in the cellar. And apart from the servants' bells, which had nameplates on, enamel nameplates showing which room was ringing the bell, so there'd be a row of bells in the cellar by the kitchen. Someone upstairs would ring it, and the bell would start jangling. It's a bell on a coil. There'd be a plaque so the servant would know which room was calling. And there were other devices. There were boxes with devices to show, with dials to show which room. So this cellar room is full of servants' bells, wires, and boxes indicating which room the servants were needed in. There was another room in the cellar full of cigars, and the room was probably, just from what I was told, 10 foot square, full of Havana cigars, floor to ceiling, wall to wall. And the auction house in London had been in, and the Earl had thought they were worth a lot of money. And the auction house had taken a box out off the front of the pile, opened it, and they were mouldy. And the auction house in London said, no, we don't want any of those cigars. So my father was asked to buy the cigars, and was told they were mouldy, and they were mouldy, but the ones in the centre were not mouldy. So my father did well out of the servants' bells, did well out of the cigars. There was some wine as well, which is a similar story. Bought some wine too. And then the most interesting part of the story is the last chamber, which was full of fire implements. So when the castle was electrified, the rooms had electrical heating and gas heating, and the Earl had stripped out all of the stuff from the fireplaces. So for example, in each room for the family there was a fire grate, 2 fire dogs, a tong, a spade, a brush, a poker, a scuttle, a fender, a fireback. And this stuff from each room had been taken out, the fireplaces had been blocked up, and all these fire implements had been chucked into a basement room, the last basement room. And this was probably done in the Edwardian area, possibly not necessarily when the castle was electrified. And the Earl said to my father, please buy all this junk, these fire tools. So my father picked up a poker from the heap, the size of a car, huge heap of ironwork, and it was fused to the pile. The whole pile had rusted solid because of the damp cellar. So again, my father had to separate everything and got a good deal. So the interesting thing about the bells is my father kept one bell. He still got it. He's 87, 86. He's still alive in Warwick. He has one of the bells from Warwick Castle he kept, and he's proud of that, obviously. And by chance, I was working for my father in the shop 15 years after he had bought these fire tools, and the castle by then had changed hands. Madame Tussaud had bought the lease of the castle off the Earl, and the curator of the castle had been told to reinstall some of the fireplaces. So this Paul Barker, he was in charge of the castle, came into the shop. I was on duty that day, and he said, we need to buy some of the fire stuff to make the rooms up again. So I sold him a fender, some fire dogs, a grate, the tools, a coal scuttle. They weren't the ones we'd bought originally, obviously, but they were the same sort of thing. So it's very strange how things go in circles. So the story's about Warwick Castle, the way the technology changed the contents of the castle, how the Earl tried to sell up and get away from Warwick, get away from England, and that's the story. I hope you found that interesting. Thank you.